Here on our channel, people's stories come to life. Stories from different eras, professions, and destinies. Each of them follows their own path, their own life woven from circumstances, challenges, and choices. Before we step into their world, make sure to subscribe, and later, share your impressions in the comments. Now, let's begin. Some stories don't start with loud events. They start small, with details, with moments that seem insignificant, yet hold entire worlds within them. These are stories about people who never chose to be heroes. They simply lived, worked, made mistakes, learned from them, and kept moving forward. The lives of such people unfold like a slowly blooming flower, each petal revealing itself in its own time, each layer hiding new secrets, new pains, new joys. This is a story from a time when the world was just a little different. The boy was born into the smell of hides and smoke. He grew up in the narrow light of an upstairs room overlooking Rue Saint-Denis, where the tanners hung their leather to dry across ropes that swayed like tired flags. The air carried a heavy sweetness, equal parts fat, soap, and damp wool. And yet beneath it lingered something else, a faint whisper of the river's cold breath that reached up from the Seine when the wind was just right. He did not have words for it then, but he recognized beauty in that invisible current and held his breath each time it passed, afraid it might never return. The family owned little. His mother mended coats for the neighbors and boiled cabbage with the same seriousness she used to thread her needle. His father spent his days bent over the vat, pressing rough hides under his arms, humming as he worked, his skin permanently marked by tannin and heat. By evening, the floorboards thrummed with his heavy boots, and the boy learned to read the rhythm of their life through sound. The clatter of pails, the scrape of heels, the steady dripping from the roof. He was quiet but observant. When other boys played dice in the alley, he lingered by the workshop door, watching vapors coil through the air like thoughts too delicate to touch. His father sometimes teased him, saying he would drown in his own curiosity one day. But the boy did not mind. He collected scents instead of toys. Chips of pine sap from the cooper's stall, crushed mint from the apothecary's gutter, a scrap of cedar stolen from a carpenter's pile. Each became a treasure that he wrapped in torn linen and hid beneath a loose board by his bed. The seasons were defined not by the calendar, but by the shifting smells of Paris. Winter brought wax and smoke. Spring, rainwater sliding through gutters. Summer, fermenting fruit and linen bleached on the line. He liked to stand at the window when storms approached, feeling the scent of rain reach him before the first drops fell. It carried a quiet promise that the world was washable, that even Rue Saint-Denis could, for a brief hour, seem clean. There was an old apothecary 2 streets away, a man with a curved back who spent his days grinding powders in large glass bowls. The boy delivered messages for him sometimes, carrying paper packets sealed with twine. The apothecary paid in kindness more often than coin. When business was slow, he would point at the jars cluttering his shelves, resins, petals, salts, and say softly, "Each of these remembers the sun." The boy would stand silently, not daring to ask more, only inhaling and memorizing the air, sharp with camphor and myrrh. Nights were the boy's secret hours. While his parents slept, he would light the stub of a candle and open his little collection. The scents had changed over time, decayed into something deeper. The sweetness of rot, the fatigue of air trapped too long. Yet he loved them. They smelled like proof of patience, like days condensed into dust. Sometimes he imagined mixing them, making something that smelled of both earth and sky. He had never seen perfume, only heard that ladies paid for it by the drop. But he believed scent was a kind of truth invisible to the proud. There were fears in that house, too. His mother spoke often of illness lingering in drafts and of demons that entered through cracks in the wall. When the milk soured too fast, she blamed the evil eye and spat into the fire. The boy found comfort in her rituals, though he did not fear the same things. He feared forgetting, that one day everything he knew might lose its smell and dissolve into blank air, that the tanner's yard, the boiling vats, even the fragile scent of bread from the bakery might vanish from memory. On Sundays, the market filled the street from dawn to fading light. He loved it best at midday, when the perfume of crushed herbs mixed with the metallic tang of coins passing from palm to palm. The things people said without speaking fascinated him. Perfumed gloves meant pride. Soap scented with rose water meant someone had hope. When a customer's perfume lingered after they left, he tried to guess their story from what hung in the air. Once, a woman brushed past him while laughing, and her scent left behind something so fragile and sad that he had to stand still for a long while, eyes closed, letting it fade. The world was small, but vast in smell. The boy understood that to know scent was to know distance, material, and memory. Leather told of work, lavender of longing, vinegar of poverty. Smoke spoke of both dinner and loss. When the neighbors quarreled, the room filled with anger and melted tallow, and he learned how emotion had an odor too, brief but unmistakable. Winter returned, and prices rose again. Bread grew thin, coins scarce. One evening his father came home shivering and silent. A fellow tanner had died of fever by dawn. The neighborhood grew cautious. Children were told not to wander. But the boy still watched the river whenever he could, finding strength in its indifferent motion. He noticed how the cold wind made even foul air seem clear, how life persisted through smell when sight and touch faltered. His senses became his first philosophy. Everything passes, yet its scent remains a little while longer. Sometimes his mother caught him sniffing the hem of her apron and laughed tiredly, saying he had the nose of a dog. He smiled, but said nothing. There were worse things to be in that quarter than a creature who remembered by scent. He began to think, though quietly, that one could earn one's bread by knowing such things, by shaping smells, taming them, making memory into work. In those days, dreams had the texture of the city itself, rough, gray, unpolished. Yet within them glowed a trace of sweetness, like jasmine straying through an open window. He did not yet know his trade, his path, or the future name people might call his craft. But he had begun to listen to the world through its invisible notes, and though he did not realize it, this listening would one day lead him far from Rue Saint-Denis and into a mystery hidden within air itself. The workshop stood low and narrow, wedged between two stone warehouses near the river. In the early hours, before sunlight reached the quay, it was already alive with sound. Pestles grinding, corks popping, and the soft pounding of feet hurrying between vessels of copper and glass. The air inside was thick, almost visible, a mingling of alcohol, orange blossom, and burnt dust. There, in that scented gloom, the boy from Rue Saint-Denis had grown into a young man with a steady hand and a cautious tongue. His master, Monsieur Delaunay, rarely spoke except to give orders. The man was thin as a reed and wore his dignity like perfume, invisible yet demanding recognition. He had apprentices enough to fill a small guild, though only 3 he called by name. The others were, as he liked to remark, lungs and hands. Our perfumer was one of them. His duties were modest: washing flasks, measuring alcohol, keeping the brass still clean enough to reflect a candle flame. Yet each task carried its own science, and he treated them with an almost religious care. Every morning, he watched as his master blended and decanted his secrets. The bottles were labeled in curling ink: jasmine absolute, orris root, neroli, benzoin, though the scents themselves seemed beyond what those names could hold. Delaunay worked as if deciphering scripture, and the young perfumer soon learned silence was the only safe companion in such company. When words were spoken, they were precise and slender. Not too hot. Stop stirring. The notes will die. There was poetry in those commands, though none dared say so. He lived in a small attic above the workshop, reached by a stair so steep it threatened punishment for haste. His bed was narrow, his window crowded by chimneys, but when the wind turned right, the scent of roses from the still room below floated up to lull him to sleep. Meals were simple: bread crusts soaked in broth, sometimes eggs when deliveries were kind. Yet he counted himself fortunate. Apprentices elsewhere worked for years without shelter or supper, while he, with diligence, might one day blend perfumes of his own. Paris below the window was changing. Prices climbed with the smoke from the bakeries, and talk of unrest spread through the markets. Yet the world of scent remained curiously untouched, a little island of refinement amid disquiet. Nobles still demanded their powders and scented gloves. Lovers, their jasmined letters. Widows, their violet waters. For them, scent was not a pleasure but armor. It masked decay, vanity, fear. And so business continued, the river flowing as steadily as ambition itself. Once a week, deliveries arrived from Grasse, casks of oil and baskets of dried flowers. The young perfumer loved those mornings. The raw materials carried with them the memory of the sun, far gentler than the Paris glare. He would untie the bundles, breathe deeply, and imagine the landscapes that gave birth to such fragrance. Hillsides heavy with roses, fields humming with lavender, and open air so pure it must have seemed unreal. He thought perhaps art was born when men tried to reclaim what they had already lost. He worked longest after dark. When the others slept, he descended quietly to the still room, lit a single taper, and experimented in secret. He had learned by now to capture the top notes of bergamot without scorching it, to trap the ghost of a crushed violet in oil before it vanished. What drove him was not greed, but curiosity, a wish to understand why certain scents recalled peace while others invoked sorrow. Sometimes he thought of his parents, still living near Rue Saint-Denis, the smell of smoke and vinegar marking their existence, and wondered what scent might speak of them truthfully, without pity. It was after one such night of solitary work that he burned his hand. The alcohol flamed without warning, biting deep before dying out. He spent 3 days hiding the injury, ashamed more than afraid. The master noticed nothing. Only the flower seller, a woman who passed the workshop door each morning, saw him wince. She was cheerful in manner, with a shawl faded by use, and carried a basket whose scent changed with the season. Roses one week, hyacinths the next. She once gave him a fallen bloom without a word. He kept it in his linen notebook for a year, until it lost both color and reason. Under Delaunay's discipline, months became indistinguishable. There was order, the strict architecture of work, and then the hour when clients arrived. Ladies wore gloves, pale as cream, and gentlemen carried canes for show. They spoke delicately, as though perfume were a matter of diplomacy rather than desire. In these encounters, the young perfumer learned more about human nature than from all his master's teachings. Nobles envied youth, but purchased memory. Servants feared notice, yet lingered too long by the samples, and the rich concealed disappointment under layers of rosewater. He began to realize that every scent carried a mask, and each mask told its own truth. At evening, when the shutters closed, the workshop grew quiet, except for the whisper of the still cooling. He would lean on the windowsill, gaze at the river, and think not of glory, but persistence. Perfume, he had come to understand, was as fragile as breath. The world demanded from it permanence, though its beauty arose from its impermanence. There was humility in that paradox, one he clung to as his own creed. Yet he was not immune to ambition. Once, while cleaning the master's desk, he found a locked drawer half open, revealing a list of commissions from the nobility, some sealed with wax. The sums beside them were enough to buy small houses. For the first time, he felt a tremor of longing, not for gold itself, but for recognition, the permission to create art without permission. He closed the drawer carefully, aware that such dreams could ruin an apprentice faster than fire. That summer, a rival perfumer was rumored to have gone blind after inhaling mercury fumes used to fix scent on gloves. Delaunay forbade his apprentices to discuss it, declaring that envy, not hazard, had destroyed the man. Still, our perfumer began to notice how the older artisans coughed more than they spoke, how their fingers discolored at the nail. Art had its price, though no one listed it on ledgers. One night, unable to sleep, he climbed to the rooftop. Paris lay vast and uneven beneath the moon, rooftops glimmering like scales of a sleeping creature. The wind carried the faintest blend of smoke, lilac, and tallow, the scent of the city's own breath. He stayed there until dawn, thinking that perhaps the secret to mastery was not invention, but understanding the air one already lived in. Over time, his master aged visibly. Commissions slowed, tempers rose. Younger merchants imported foreign oils more cheaply, and customers grew fickle, chasing novelty. In this slow decline, the apprentice bore witness to something both sad and instructive, how an artist could grow blind to the world's changes while still claiming to capture its essence in a bottle. It taught him caution, to listen not only to what pleased the nose, but also to what moved the heart. By the time another winter settled over Paris, he had become Delaunay's most reliable hand. The master, though grudging in praise, had begun to trust him with blending certain base notes, amber and musk, though never the final fragrance. "Not yet," was all he said, turning away. The apprentice replied, "As you wish," and resumed his task. What he did not reveal, not even to himself, was that he no longer worked merely to please. Each mixture he prepared contained a private intention, fragments of memory transmuted into scent, rain on stone, wool by a fire, the bruised petals of a flower seller's basket. Through labor he had learned the laws of transformation. Through scent, the unspoken truth that everything decays into something else. And beneath it all, a quiet intuition stirred that his craft, humble as it was, might one day lead him beyond the walls of this narrow workshop, if only he continued to follow what the air whispered when no one was listening. When spring awakened Paris again, the air changed its manner. Smoke floated lighter above the rooftops, flowers crept from window boxes, and the Seine carried the scent of thawing wood downstream. In those months, the perfumer, no longer an apprentice, not yet a master, tended his own modest stall near the Rue des Lombards. His sign bore only a painted vial and the words, "Essence et senteur." Behind that simplicity lay years of quiet work, faith in the hands, and a discipline that no fortune could counterfeit. Each day began early. The neighborhood awoke to the rattle of carts and the braying of donkeys, and he, already in his apron, set out his display of bottles, some clear, some tinted blue or green to calm the light. There was no luxury here, only craft. His perfumes were meant for the ordinary. The laundress with her aching back, the young soldier's sweetheart, the widow who bought a single drop of violet water to soothe her solitude. He appreciated them all, for their honesty was aromatic, unadorned. If he had ambition now, it was quiet, nourished less by success than by the contentment of daily making. Still, fortune has a way of masking its intent. One afternoon, when clouds hung low over the city and the market thinned early, a carriage stopped at the end of the street. Its wheels murmured rather than clattered, as if discretion guided even the horses. From it stepped a lady, veiled, gloved, and carrying a single small parcel wrapped in linen. She walked with care, the air of someone accustomed to being seen, but unwilling to be recognized. He looked up from arranging bottles as her shadow crossed the threshold. She did not remove her gloves. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was clear but weary, like a melody dimly recalled. She asked whether he could recreate a perfume long vanished, one that had belonged to her mother and was known by name only in memory. Souvenir de l'aube, memory of dawn. She said it had not been made since the reign of the late king. He asked what she recalled of its scent. She paused. "If memory can be trusted," she said, "it was the smell of waiting, of silk still cold before it warms to the skin." He agreed to try. His price was modest, her gratitude heavier than coin. She left the parcel as reference, a small scrap of yellowed fabric faintly fragrant, folded within soft tissue. Before departing, she lifted her veil halfway, enough for him to glimpse a face of restrained beauty, the kind shaped equally by sorrow and good breeding. Then she vanished into the street's pale light, her carriage melting into the drizzle. From that day, the workshop became quieter. He approached the task not as a tradesman filling an order, but as a pilgrim seeking lost faith. Each evening, he unwrapped the fabric and inhaled cautiously, tracing its notes through memory. The fragrance was fragile, near to death, yet within its faint whisper something stirred, a blend of amber and lily, though softened by something indefinable, perhaps the dust of time itself. To capture it demanded more than skill. It asked for empathy, the sense emotional anatomy. As he worked, rumors reached him that the lady belonged to one of the old noble families who now lived in half-ruined hotels, maintaining dignity while fortune slipped away. Some said she was a widow, others that she was in mourning for a son. He did not ask. Paris was full of private griefs, and questions seldom fed the spirit. What mattered was her request, the recreation of something that time had buried, a resurrection by scent. The days merged into study. He tested roses from Provence, tuberose from Italy, and a rare musk distilled from grain. None repeated the tone he sought. The missing note haunted him. It seemed almost human, as though born from skin, memory, and absence, rather than any measurable source. The glove fabric yielded no secret. The scent clung as if to mock analysis. When exhaustion blurred his mind, he recalled his first years under Delaunay. Precision, repetition, hierarchy. Those methods failed him now. The challenge was not the perfection of formula, but the comprehension of emotion. At the marketplace, a rival perfumer once jested that he chased dreams instead of customers. It might have been true. His work on this perfume distanced him from reality. Meals forgotten, orders neglected. Yet amidst those failures, his craft deepened, as though the mystery itself refined him. When the scent began to take shape, warm amber twined with faint powder, anchored by musk and a trace of wood smoke, he felt not triumph, but solemnity, as one might feel while restoring a faded painting. Then one morning the lady returned. No carriage this time, only a discreet knock. She seemed frailer, though the veil again hid most of her face. He presented the first sample with care, the liquid pale gold against glass. She lifted the stopper, inhaled once, and closed her eyes. A tremor passed her, too brief to read. "It is close," she whispered, "but not yet awake. The heart of it sleeps." She left a small purse for his trouble and promised to return. She never did. Days passed, then weeks. He sent a note to the address given, which was returned sealed with another hand. The house, he learned, was shuttered, servants dismissed. Some said the lady had gone abroad, others murmured darker endings. On the 5th week, as he debated whether to destroy the sample, a courier delivered a small parcel with no name. Inside lay a single white glove, finely sewn, bearing her delicate perfume. Neither the one he made, nor the faint scent of the fabric. It was something else entirely, almost impossible to define, soft as distance, bitter as longing. He kept the glove on his desk for days, uncertain whether it was gift, message, or mistake. Each attempt to analyze its fragrance yielded contradiction. Rose dissolved into smoke, amber into dust, meaning into speculation. He feared he imagined it, that perhaps memory itself had turned perfumer, crafting illusions in his mind. Still, the mystery held him captive. Paris, meanwhile, darkened with unease. Bread grew scarce. Nobles discreetly left the city, and talk of change crept even into quiet trades. He felt the tremor, but worked on, as though the scent might protect him from uncertainty. In quieter hours he thought of the lady, her voice, that mixture of command and resignation, and wondered whether her disappearance was a matter of will or fate. One evening, shutting his stall, he noticed on the street a beggar selling trinkets. Among them lay a tiny silver clasp shaped like a lily, old and tarnished. It matched the ornament sewn into the seam of the glove. He bought it for a sou, more out of instinct than logic. That night, holding both together, he caught again that strange perfume in the air, though neither object seemed scented. It hovered briefly, then vanished, leaving behind nothing but the faint sweetness of candle smoke. He could have turned away, stored the glove as a curiosity, and returned to his modest trade. Yet something deeper had awakened, a wish not born of greed or desire, but of comprehension. The glove had become a riddle, and he, who had spent years taming invisible fragrances, now found himself pursuing an equally invisible truth. In his workroom, surrounded by jars and silence, he reached for the glove one last time before extinguishing the light. The fabric pressed cool against his palm, and a new thought, half fear and half hope, passed through him. That some sense demand to be followed, not deciphered. That perhaps, without knowing, he had just stepped beyond the boundaries of his trade and into the province of destiny itself. That winter arrived early. Frost crept across the shutters long before the bells of Advent, and the air of Paris grew sharp enough to bite. Yet within his narrow shop, the perfumer worked, surrounded by warmth and mystery. The single scented glove lying motionless on the counter, like a small, sleeping creature. Its perfume had altered with the cold, deepened in a way that reminded him of ashes after fire. He would lift it gently, inhale, and feel the faintest shiver under his ribs, that uncertain border between fascination and fear. He had written twice more to the address the noblewoman had given. Both letters returned unopened, though each carried a different seal. One bore a crest scratched away, the other no mark at all, only the faint print of a finger, as if someone had touched the wax while it was still soft. These little details, so trivial to others, gnawed at him. For the first time, scent alone did not suffice. He felt the pull of questions, shapes he could not yet name. The glove itself became his only witness. By day he tried to occupy his mind with trade. Customers still came. Bakers' wives seeking lavender water, clerks requesting musk to impress mistresses, a widow choosing rosemary for remembrance. He served them dutifully, bowing with patience. Yet with every sale his gaze drifted to that single glove resting in its glass case. Its fragrance, faint but alive, tempted him more than any commission could. When the market slowed, he began his investigation. The scent, analyzed as best as a private man might attempt, was built upon components he recognized: amber, iris, perhaps a drop of animal musk. But something else drifted within it like a shadow, a resin, bitter and warm, one he could not name. It was this that compelled him. The note was neither French nor Italian. It had the desert's dryness, the salt of saltless lands. He thought of Grasse, of the merchants who brought their wares north, distillers who carried the gossip of scent. One evening, after locking up, he decided to seek them out. The journey was short but cold, the streets glittering with thawed sleet. At the Perfume Merchants Guild office he found an old records clerk who smelled faintly of parchment and vanilla. When the perfumer explained his search, the man tapped his quill against the desk and frowned. "There is an amber resin such as you describe," the clerk said finally, "but it is rare now. Comes from beyond the sea, if at all. Sold once through a trader named Alizard down near the southern ports. I recall that name only because he owed the guild taxes. Do you know where he might be found?" The clerk shook his head before the quill finished scratching. "Dead, most likely. But sometimes the dead leave debts, and debts have a way of walking." The perfumer thanked him, paid a small coin for the trouble, and stepped back into the night. He had gained little, and yet something had ignited. Not the solution itself, but the outline of pursuit. He walked the embankment home, the scent of the river thick as old metal, wondering how a vanished trader and a vanished lady could be joined by the ghost of a single fragrance. In the following days he traced every merchant who might have sold similar materials. Most denied knowledge, a few hinted at supplies acquired under discretion. From one grease-stained ledger he copied a name, A. Alizard, delivery to Rue de Verneuil. That street lay near the southern docks where barges unloaded oils and tar. He went there quietly, carrying no light except the cold hope that the trail would not yet have vanished like scent in wind. Rue de Verneuil was a place of contrasts. Dyers' sheds beside crumbling manors, alleys where sailors shouted through fog. He found the warehouse easily enough, doors chained, windows dusted white from disuse. Inside, the air smelled of damp wool and forgotten spices. On a rotted shelf he found remnants of resin sealed in cracked glass. Its color, even through grime, gleamed honey-dark. When he broke a piece and warmed it between his fingers, he felt the breath of the same perfume that haunted the glove. Faint, but irrefutable. He wrapped the fragments carefully in cloth, knowing he carried more than an ingredient. This, he felt, was the resonance of another life, perhaps her own. Returning home, he worked through the night. Distilled cautiously, the resin yielded oil as thick as gold. Mixed with amber and iris, it produced a scent close to what lingered in the glove. Warmer now, less melancholy, yet still something was missing. The final whisper, the humanity of it. He wondered if that part dwelled not in material, but in memory. Paris itself seemed to conspire with his mood. The city had grown strange. Nobles vanished from the boulevards, servants spoke in whispers, and coins changed hands more slowly. Yet his workroom stood apart, timeless in its pursuit of fragrance. There, every bottle glimmered in dim light like a captive season. Every essence a confession of the world's desire to endure. He began to dream not of the lady's face, which memory could barely fix, but of her voice, smooth and tired, asking for a scent that waited, always waited. One night, as he prepared to leave, a knock rattled the door. On the threshold stood a woman wrapped in shawls, her shoes wet from rain. She was not the noblewoman, though her eyes held something familiar, that same guarded sadness. She called herself Jean, a washerwoman from Rue de Bac. "You sold perfume once to a lady in a veil," she said. "I carried letters for her before she left." His heart quickened. "Do you know where she went?" The washerwoman hesitated, glancing toward the dark street. "They say south, maybe the coast." She paid her servants well before dismissing them. told me the scent she ordered was her mother's memory, nothing more. But the day after, men came asking questions. Gentle voices, sharp eyes. That was when she disappeared. He pressed a little coin into her hand for courage, but she gave it back. "Keep it," she said, and her voice softened. She was kind, that one. But kindness doesn't save a soul when secrets grow too large. When she left, he stood for a long time staring at the candle flame, its smoke curling upward like breath from the glove. Secrets. The word clung to him. Could a fragrance conceal more than memory? Perhaps message, confession, even guilt? He opened the glove box again and inhaled. Now he thought he sensed something new. A faint tang of ink, wax, and iron. The scent of writing, of paper sealed and burned. In the following weeks, he returned to the glove repeatedly, comparing it with his own recreations. Each attempt carried him deeper into thought. He no longer believed he sought a formula alone. He felt as though the perfume itself resisted him, guarding its purpose. Yet obsession became solace. Outside, the world grew uncertain, but inside the small shop, the war of hearts and ideas remained distant. Sometimes he imagined the noblewoman as she might be now, standing before the sea, glove in hand, releasing it to the wind. Other times he fancied that the glove had not been hers at all, but belonged to another whose story she carried. Such musings changed nothing, yet they kept him company. And in their shadow, new ideas germinated. Fragments of philosophy born from fragrance. He began to see perfume as a language of absence, what people say when words fail them. A pale morning found him mixing oils with unsteady hand. On the table lay his notes, scattered as though disturbed by sleep. One line, half written, caught his own eye. To follow a scent is to follow memory. To find its source is to lose both. He stared at it, then looked again at the glove. Its perfume had faded slightly, as if aware of his intrusion. He closed the lid, feeling oddly chastened. The mystery had ceased to frighten him. It had become part of his craft's rhythm. Yet beneath that calm stirred a quiet resolve. Somewhere, amid the city's shifting fog, truth lingered as fragrance does, unseen but undeniable. All one needed was the patience to breathe, to listen, and to wait for the air itself to reveal what it remembered. The air of Paris thickened with unease before the leaves even began to fall. The perfumer noticed it, not in words or proclamations, but in the silence between footsteps, in the way customers exchanged glances before whispering of shortages, of breadlines, of lists no one wished to see. Yet beneath that tension, his own pursuit continued, solitary, deliberate, sheltered by the walls of craft. The glove still rested on his desk, but its mystery now pointed him away from the city. The resin he had found near the docks matched the strange note in the noblewoman's perfume, but the sample was impure. Each time he tried to refine it, the essence broke apart, leaving behind the sour trace of failure. The scent resisted him, demanding a journey his skill could not achieve alone. One evening, weighing the last fragments of resin under candlelight, he made a quiet decision. He would leave Paris, travel south where the amber was said to come from, and find its true origin. The journey began in early spring, when the roads were still streaked with puddles. and the mail coaches rattled over stones like weary bones. He traveled with few possessions, a small satchel of instruments, a notebook, and the glove wrapped in linen. His seatmates spoke of taxes, the price of salt, and the swelling unrest in the capital. He listened politely, thinking instead of the landscape through which he passed. Fields greening after rain, lone farmhouses raising thin columns of smoke, the distant shimmer of lavender not yet in bloom. The south smelt warmer even before he reached it. In Grasse, the hills unfolded like open palms filled with flowers. Here the craft of perfume was older than memory, guarded by families whose hands had worked the same presses for generations. He rented a room above a candle shop and introduced himself cautiously. At first, the villagers treated him as one might treat a tax collector, politely but without trust. Yet skill, like fragrance, leaves evidence. When he repaired a leaking still for the widow who owned the shop, word spread that he was one of their own kind, a man who knew the language of oil and patience. The days there ran slower. Morning began with the hiss of steam from distilleries, afternoons with the rustle of baskets filled with orange blossom. He followed every lead he could find about the resin. Some spoke of traders from the Levant, others of smugglers who mixed ashes with amber to test the nose of the buyer. An old distiller, his hands black with age and pitch, mentioned a substance once used to give warmth to perfumes meant for mourning. "It lived between worlds, that resin," the man said, showing a bottle of dark syrup. "Neither spice nor root. A memory in liquid." When the perfumer uncorked it, the air thickened with something both sweet and bitter, as though spring itself had burned. His pulse quickened. Beneath the edge of smoke, he could smell that elusive tone, the one he had hunted since the day of the noblewoman's visit. Only here, in the open air of the hills, did it reveal its full voice. He purchased a small vial and carried it back like a relic. The evenings in Grasse carried the kind of tranquility that Paris forgot. The silence broken only by insects and the murmur of a stream. In such hours, he found himself drawn to the company of the widow who owned the candle shop. Her name was Claire, though the locals called her simply La Chandelière. She had lost her husband years before to fever, and now lived among shelves of beeswax and tallow, her hair smelling faintly of honey and smoke. They spoke little at first, sharing meals in quiet. Gradually, conversation opened, winding between scents and memories. She told him of her garden beyond the fields, where violets grew wild, small, shy things among the stones. He visited it with her one afternoon. The soil was dry, but the flowers released a fragrance so soft it seemed to float between joy and sadness. "Violets keep secrets," she said, gathering them. "They never bloom for long, but when they do, the air itself changes." He believed her. Perhaps it was only coincidence, but when the breeze moved through those blossoms, he caught again that same ghostly harmony he sought in the vanished lady's perfume, as though the violet echoed the amber's heartbeat. He began to blend the two essences late into the nights, candlelight bending around his tools. The first attempts were failures, the scents fighting each other like mismatched souls. Yet patience, the discipline of all crafts, rewarded him gradually. By the fifth mixture he found balance, an aroma of smoke melting into petal, grief leaning tenderly toward warmth. He slept for the first time in weeks, the window open, the air filled with a sweetness neither joy nor sorrow could claim entirely. Claire noticed his fatigue and asked nothing of his secrets, only that he eat, that he rest. He tried to tell her part of it, how a commission had turned into obsession, how scent had become labyrinth. She laughed softly, saying only, "Every scent hides a story. Some are better left in the bottle." But her smile carried sympathy, and the next morning he found a basket of violets waiting on the table with bread and wine. He thanked her silently, knowing she had given what no art could: a pause. Rumors drifted south even here, Paris in turmoil, nobles fleeing, soldiers marching under bright banners of words that promised freedom. The world's air was changing faster than men could breathe it. He sensed it, though distantly. For now, all that existed was this valley, the quiet labor of scent, the slow uncoiling of understanding. The mystery had shifted from fear to reflection. Perhaps, he thought, the noblewoman's disappearance was not crime, but escape from a life too perfumed, too heavy with memory. Weeks passed, his notebook filled with notes on amber, violet, and ash. Yet what he truly wrote were confessions disguised as recipes, thoughts of fleeting joy, of solitude, of the dignity of work. One entry, penned in a tired hand, read, "When all borders fall, scent remains the last order of the world." He read it twice and felt both comforted and saddened by its truth. When at last he prepared to leave, the widow walked him to the edge of the fields. She pressed into his hand a dried violet wrapped in wax paper. "For luck," she said. He answered only by clasping her fingers briefly, an unspoken gratitude. The countryside glimmered under morning light, and for a breath he wished to remain. Yet the road called, and with it the lingering puzzle of the noblewoman's fate. The return to Paris was slow. The land seemed older on the way back, the inns quieter, the air colder. On the 15th evening, the coach crested a ridge above the city just as dusk unfolded. A faint veil of smoke hung above the rooftops. Bells tolled somewhere unseen. The perfumer felt both a traveler and a stranger, carrying within him not merely amber and violet, but a portion of distance itself. Back in his workshop, he set down his satchel and unwrapped the violet-scented cloth. The familiar tools, the old flasks, the glove beneath its glass dome, all were as he had left them, yet they seemed transformed, as if awaiting his next gesture. He opened the vial from Grasse, mixed it with the new oil, and let a single drop fall onto the folded glove. The scent rose instantly, neither the lady's perfume nor his invention, but something between, tender, mortal, profoundly human. It carried ashes and bloom, farewell and arrival. He stood still until night deepened, listening to the silence that followed the air's exhalation. For the first time in months, he felt no need to understand. Some fragrances ask not to be solved, only remembered. Outside, a chill wind swept through the street, carrying the faintest mingling of smoke and violet. He closed the door carefully and turned away from the window. The glove resting beside the near-spent candle breathed a final thread of perfume into the dim room. A whisper that lingered long after he ceased to scent it, delicate as something almost forgiven. Paris seemed smaller upon his return, as though the months away had expanded something in him that no longer fit the city's measure. The air hung heavy with unrest, yet the scents remained. bread baking against scarcity, tallow smoke rising from workshops, wax from hastily burned candles in narrow windows. People spoke less in the streets, their glances brief and watchful. Through it all, he walked with the quiet intent of one who follows an invisible line only the nose can trace. The glove and the scent of violet had not left his thoughts. Each time he breathed the mixture he had refined, memories stirred. Traces of the noble woman's perfume, her voice that trembled between command and confession, the mystery of her vanishing. But now the fragrance no longer invited wonder. It pointed towards something half-buried, a place both physical and emotional, waiting to be unsealed. In one of the communication ledgers from his trade contact in Grasse, he noticed the mention of a once prosperous townhouse in Paris's Faubourg Saint-Germain district. The entry noted deliveries to the residence of Madame de Varenne, followed by a payment long overdue. The name meant nothing to most, but his memory linked it to the wax seals on the returned letters, those same half-scratched crests. That night, seated by his window, the perfumer decided he would visit the address. The house revealed itself near twilight, hidden behind a sunless garden where ivy had conquered the gate. The windows stared blankly, most shuttered, one cracked. What remained of wealth clung stubbornly to details: a rusted knocker in the shape of a rose, the marble doorstep veined with dirt, faint traces of gold leaf clinging to the main door's carvings. He hesitated before entering. The air smelled of brick and rain, no perfume, no trace of human life. Still, something compelled him forward. Inside, dust softened every corner, but the silence carried weight, as if listening. The foyer bore portraits dulled by years of neglect. A few hung askew, faces half shrouded in grime. He moved carefully, his lantern showing bits of forgotten luxury: pearled gloves, the cracked rim of a mirror, wilted book spines. When he breathed, the smell of age overwhelmed him: paper, mildew, faint sweetness of decayed fabric. No fragrance lingered from any living soul. He followed instinct rather than reason, exploring the upper floor where light still reached from a fractured skylight. Behind a warped door he found a small chamber, what had once been a dressing room. There stood an ornate vanity, its surface strewn with empty bottles and glass stoppers. On one still sat a faded label, Souvenir de l'Aube. The handwriting was unmistakable, precise yet trembling with haste. The bottle held no liquid, only air, yet when he tilted it, the faintest shadow of the scent stirred. It was the same perfume he had nearly recreated, only thinner, haunted. The glove's twin. He sat for some time without moving, understanding that the answer he sought was already dissolving with the dust. The perfume had existed here before its commissioner vanished. Among the pale debris lay a locked chest covered by a sheet. He pried it open to reveal letters, yellowed ribbons, and broken seals. Their contents told no tale of intrigue or wealth, but of grief. Most were addressed to a man presumed dead in war, others written but never sent. Traces of a correspondence clinging to loss. Between pages, he found a single handkerchief stiff with dried perfume, and a second glove, its color faded, yet matching precisely the one in his shop. He folded the glove carefully, noticing a faint stain on the wrist, darker than the surrounding silk. He could not name it. Perhaps spilled oil, perhaps something more organic. But the scent, yes, the scent remained, thin but unmistakably human, the essence of longing reduced to molecule. He realized then that the noblewoman's commission had been no purchase of vanity, but one of remembrance. She had sought not a fragrance for pleasure, but an echo for mourning. Outside the window, a church bell rang softly, its sound filtering through broken glass. The perfumer closed the chest and stood motionless, surrounded by still air. What had once been a sanctuary of wealth had become a mausoleum of memories. He walked through the hall once more before leaving, noting how each step disturbed dust that smelled faintly of age and lilac, like the final breath of luxury decaying into history. It was nearly dark when he returned to the street. The city's lamps flickered uncertainly, their oil dearer than ever. He paused at the garden gate and looked back. Through the grime-covered window, he thought he saw movement, a curtain shifting, perhaps the illusion of draft. It could have been only air, but he felt watched. For a moment he considered knocking again, half expecting the lady to appear, veil lowered, asking for the scent to be finished at last. But the impulse faded. Some doors, once opened, only reveal what memory has already decided. Back in his workshop, he placed the second glove beside the first. Together they seemed less eerie, almost tender. He worked for hours to recreate the faded scent from the house, attempting to translate not its formula, but its feeling. Resin for devotion, violet for sorrow, oak moss for time. Each distillation drew him nearer to something fragile and honest. The perfume of loss refused to die. When at last he had captured it as faithfully as human skill allowed, he set down the pipette and sat in silence. Candlelight glimmered against the bottles like tombstones polished by rain. The workshop smelled now of warmth and memory intertwined. The scent of someone long gone, inhabiting the air one final time. He lit no more candles that night. Instead, he opened the window, letting the perfume drift into the street where strangers passed unaware. The fragrance mingled with coal smoke and damp, fading into the city's breath. Watching it vanish, he felt neither victory nor despair, only calm understanding. For years he had believed perfume was a craft of beauty. Now he saw it as a keeper of ghosts, the most delicate house of remembrance. The noblewoman had not run from him, nor from any secret others might name. She had simply gone where scent cannot follow. He closed the shutters and sat until morning. The glove lay beneath the thinnest film of dust, yet its presence no longer haunted him. What lingered instead was gratitude, for having followed a mystery that began in luxury and ended in truth, for having learned through sweetness and decay alike that every fragrance, no matter how fine, becomes air in the end. The spring following his discovery was unlike any he had known. The air itself changed character, sharper, restless, and charged with the scent of smoke not yet visible. Paris trembled with rumors of transformation, with proclamations carried by wind and shouted on street corners. The perfumer, now a man who had wandered through silence and memory, looked upon this new age as one might regard a storm seen from far off, aware of its power, yet powerless to resist it. Trade dwindled. Customers vanished without farewells, and those who still came asked no questions, buying quickly before disappearing into the anonymity of unrest. His shelves stood half empty, his oils carefully rationed. The glove, last trace of the vanished lady, now lay behind glass like an exhibit from a dream. Some evenings he wondered if he had invented her entirely, a story conjured by scent and loneliness. But when he lifted the lid, the faint, unmistakable perfume still rose, proof that memory was real, at least in vapor. The craft became refuge. He worked as if preparing for disappearance, bottling not for sale, but for preservation. The small room filled with fragrances no one would name again. Rose that spoke of peace, myrtle that guarded forgotten loves, and the faint shadow of the perfume he had reconstructed from that house of ghosts. His instruments, stained but orderly, waited like loyal companions. The city outside howled with change, yet within those walls all motion remained inward, towards concentration. He did not intend to make another perfume. Yet one afternoon, while sorting his remaining oils, he noticed how the scent of the gloves had faded further, like breath stilled in slumber. Something in him resisted that fading. He could not bear to let the fragrance die quietly. He decided to attempt one final distillation, not to restore the lady's scent, but to preserve the story she had left behind. If memory could be captured, it would live in essence, beyond name and identity. He began the process without ceremony. First, the amber resin from Grasse, aged and darker now, thick as longing. Then the trace of violet, dried nearly to powder but still breathing through its fragility. Into that he poured a touch of rosewater for kindness and a measure of musk for truth. The mixture hissed softly as vapors rose, curling through the air like handwriting dissolving into smoke. By nightfall, the room was filled with an aroma both familiar and foreign, alive, yet calm as dusk after rain. He sealed the vial and placed it upon the table. Its color was neither gold nor brown, but somewhere between, the color of patience. For a long time he sat before it, uncertain what he had made. It was as if the perfume contained not only scent, but understanding, the invisible record of years, his boyhood among tanners, the silence of apprenticeship, the haunted commission, and the slow awakening that followed. The vial held them all in equilibrium, balanced between decay and endurance. Outside, the city hummed with chaos. Bells rang not for worship, but for warning. Crowds roared, their voices rising like the hiss of overboiled oils. Yet none of this entered the perfumer's quiet domain. He heard only the steady tick of the still cooling, the occasional whisper of wind between the shutter slats. At times, he wondered whether his craft had become a kind of rebellion, a defiance of noise through attention, of forgetting through fragrance. A few loyal patrons returned, their eyes tired but courteous. One day, a young mother came asking for perfume to remind her of her husband gone to the provinces. He offered her some of his remaining stock. Then, as impulse guided him, one drop from the new blend. She inhaled, smiled faintly, and said it smelled of home after rain. Her words reassured him more than any praise could, that what he had distilled was not ghostly, but human, belonging to the living. After her departure, he poured the rest of the mixture into several small bottles, labeling them simply memoir. He did not advertise them, but those who received them spoke of calm, of being reminded of something tender they could not name. For him, that was enough. He knew he had reached the end of creation, not defeat, but completion. Every craft has a moment where it turns from pursuit to reflection. One evening, he walked to the quay. The river carried fragments of wood and garbage, but also the smell of rain, of iron, of resilience. He thought of the noblewoman, whether she still lived or existed only in the layers of amber and violet he had mixed into air. He realized that though her mystery had drawn him into obsession, it had also led him to wisdom, that the essence of a fragrance, like of a memory, is its impermanence. When he returned home, he extinguished the lamps and sat beside the work table. The bottles glowed faintly in the dark, each one a fragment of stored time. The glove lay folded in silk, its scent now barely traceable. He touched it gently, no longer with the yearning of pursuit, but with the tenderness one offers an old wound. The silence in the workshop felt different, no longer the solitude of obsession, but the calm of understanding. Later, when troubles swept the quarter, he carried only a few possessions: his notebook, the vial labeled memoir, and the smallest of his instruments. He locked the door without looking back. The city would change, shops would vanish, but the air, he thought, would always remember faintly the fragrances it had once carried. That night he found refuge in a friend's attic at the edge of the river. By candlelight, he reopened the vial, half expecting the scent to have escaped. But it remained, gentle, patient, unbroken. He let the aroma drift about the small space. The scent spread slowly, mingling with the candle smoke, the must of old wood, the chill of river air. He understood then that the perfume no longer belonged to him, nor to the lady who had sparked it. It belonged to time itself. He remained sitting long after the candle died, the air filled with the faint memory of all that had been: love, loss, labor, and revelation, condensed into breath. The vial stood open, though nothing seemed to vanish. Perhaps true fragrance, like meaning, does not fade but transforms, becoming the air we live within. By dawn, the city resumed its faint heartbeat. He rose, feeling lighter than he had in years. On the desk, the last distillation gleamed softly, its scent woven into the fibers of the room. It was no longer a perfume, but a lesson left to the quiet hours. That creation, when sincere, does not seek eternity. It simply teaches the world how to vanish gracefully. Years passed quietly. The world changed again and again, but the rhythm of the countryside where he now lived moved with the patience of weather. The perfumer had left Paris long ago, when the noise of revolution gave way to weariness, and the hunger for peace replaced victory's clamor. The fields stretched wide outside his cottage, pale with grain at harvest time and silvered by frost in winter. Beyond them, a narrow stream filled the nights with its low, ceaseless murmur, a sound that slowed the heart rather than stirred it. He no longer kept a shop. The wars and new governments, the taxes and decrees had taken too much from the city's craftsmen. Yet out here, where the air was freer, he discovered a quieter alchemy. His trade continued, though stripped to its essence. He distilled oils for the farmers' wives who still believed in small luxuries, soap with thyme for bathing, sachets for lemon, simple pomades of beeswax and violet leaf. It was work both humble and honest, enough to fill his hands and leave his mind in peace. The cottage smelled of thyme itself, a blend of dried herbs that hung from the rafters, of wax cooling, of wood smoke, and the faint tang of lavender that seeped into the walls. Morning light entered through a single window slanted toward the east, where every sunrise carried the memory of the old name, the souvenir de l'aube, the memory of dawn. He never spoke the phrase aloud anymore, but sometimes the scent of dew on new grass brought it back unbidden. His days followed an old, reassuring order. He rose with the sun, brewed a cup of bitter chicory, and tended the garden behind the cottage. There he grew mint, rose geranium, jasmine, and a single row of violets that each spring spread wider by their own will. The flowers asked for little: water at dusk, the careful removal of weeds, silence. In their scent, he felt reminded of all that could be healed by gentleness. Among the villagers, he was known simply as le faiseur d'arômes, the maker of scents. Children ran errands for him. Old men came to warm their hands by his small hearth in winter. The widow from the neighboring farm baked bread for him once a week and left it by the door without a word. There was companionship here, but no demands. Each life allowed its own edges. His laughter, though rare, came easily now, rising like birds startled from rest. Sometimes visitors from the city came, merchants searching for new oils or curiosities. They found little to entice ambition. The perfumer greeted them politely, sold what he could spare, and sent them on their way. They spoke of progress, new methods, new chemicals that could imitate any scent. These things interested him in thought, but not in practice. He had come to see that imitation, however perfect, lacked the soul of what slipped away. To him, the fading of true fragrance was part of its meaning. On long evenings after work, he sat outside beneath the linden tree that shaded his door, watching light withdraw across the fields. The air carried mixed odors then, the cool of water, the musk of soil, the faint trace of smoke from distant hearths. It was in these moments he felt the nearest to happiness, not the joy of success or discovery, but the still contentment that needs no witness. He would close his eyes and think, this too is creation, to breathe, to remember, to let the world be enough. In a wooden box by his bedside lay the remnants of his former life, the notebook filled with formulas browned at the edges, a small brass scale polished smooth by use, and at the bottom 2 silk gloves preserved in linen. Their color had paled to ivory, their perfume long surrendered. He sometimes unfolded them, not out of grief, but curiosity, as one studies a relic whose purpose has shifted from beauty to proof. Once, while cleaning, he found that the air stirred faintly as he lifted the fabric, perhaps an echo of the scent that had begun it all, or perhaps imagination completing what time had erased. He smiled at the memory of his younger self, the boy leaning over vats of leather, the apprentice afraid of masters, the man chasing a glove through the corridors of loss. Each version of him had left a trace, yet all had joined now into something whole and quiet. What had once seemed mystery had become understanding. That perfume, that vanished noblewoman, the long wandering, they had not led to mastery of scent, but to humility before life's fleeting nature. On one spring afternoon, when the fields shimmered with heat, he walked along the bank of the stream, gathering mint and angelica for drying. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying with it a scent so familiar he stopped mid-step. It was delicate, faint, and impossible, a hint of amber touched by violet. He stood still, eyes half closed, listening more than smelling. The perfume lingered only a heartbeat before it vanished into open air. Yet in that instant, his chest filled with the same awe he had felt decades earlier when the noblewoman had first spoken of souvenir de l'aube. He did not seek its source. Instead, he sat on the grass, hands resting on his knees, breathing calmly. Perhaps some passing breeze had brushed through his own violet patch and mingled with the resin drying near the kitchen window. Or perhaps memory itself had taken fragrance again for just a moment, reminding him that nothing truly disappears, it merely changes its vessel. That evening he returned home and finished the day's work. The lamps burned low, their smoke curling like thin ink lines against the ceiling. He poured a little warm wax into a shallow mold, mixed it with lavender oil, and waited until it cooled. The habit of precision remained even when no customer demanded it. When the mold set, he placed it on the windowsill, allowing the night air to carry its scent into the garden. He sat for a long while, without purpose, listening to the invisible world breathing beyond the walls, the insects humming, water murmuring, the trees creaking softly under the night's touch. He thought of every fragrance he had ever known: leather, smoke, rain, jasmine, the scent of human skin wrapped in solitude. All of them gathered in his mind, mingling and dissolving into a single harmony too fine for language. He felt then what he could not have understood in his youth, that the art he had served was not about permanence or even beauty, but recognition. The art of noticing the smallest truths before they vanish. Scent had taught him that. Memory confirmed it. Time, it seemed, had distilled both into quiet gratitude. Outside, dawn began its slow ascent, painting the fields with silver haze. The perfumer leaned back, eyes half closed, as the first light touched his face. The night's cool air, heavy with the mingled aromas of soil and bloom, slipped across the threshold and filled the room. For a moment, the cottage seemed to breathe. It was then, in that fragile stillness before full morning, that he smiled, a soft, content gesture, unseen by anyone. The air around him carried no perfume he had mixed, no ghost from the past, only the honest fragrance of life itself. And that, he knew, was enough.